9. SHAKIRA. If you grew up during the early 2000s, you've most likely heard of the Grammy Award-winning pop singer SHAKIRA, who rose to international stardom with her hit single Hips Don't Lie after becoming popular in the Spanish-speaking music market. She continued singing over the years, but eventually fell largely out of the spotlight to pursue what seemed like a more settled-down existence with her now ex-partner, Spanish soccer player Gerard Piqué. The couple welcomed their first child in 2013 while living in Barcelona. SHAKIRA owns several homes outside Spain, including in Miami Beach, Uruguay, and the Bahamas. It's unclear how much time the Colombian beauty spent in all these places over the last several years, but the Spanish government thinks she's lying about her time in Spain. And so, they're eager to get their hands on the $15 million in back taxes they claim she owes. Authorities charged SHAKIRA with tax evasion in 2022 and are accusing her of failing to pay taxes for time she spent living in Spain in 2012 and 2014. They claim that the singer spent more than 6 months of each year in the country, and that she's therefore required to pay income taxes. Prosecutors are also accusing her of concealing her income and hiding assets through shell companies during those years. A representative for SHAKIRA has consistently argued that the singer has always paid her taxes and doesn't owe the Spanish treasury a single dime. During an interview with Elle magazine, SHAKIRA maintained that she didn't live in Spain in 2012 or 2014, and that she was on tour for much of the period in question. In her words, there was no way she would even qualify as a resident because of how much time she spent out of the country. She went on to say, "The Spanish tax authorities saw that I was dating a Spanish citizen and started to salivate. It's clear they wanted to go after that money no matter what." Prosecutors offered SHAKIRA a plea deal, but she refused to back down, and the case is slated to go to trial. They're now seeking an 8-year prison sentence and a $24 million fine. While the outcome of the case remains to be seen, if Spain's justice system is anywhere near as unforgiving as some other countries when it comes to defendants rejecting plea deals, the consequences could be painfully harsh if she's convicted. SHAKIRA told Elle magazine that her decision to stand trial is a matter of principle. In other words, she believes it's the right thing to do regardless of the potential outcome. 8. Michael Hash. Eric Weekly and his childhood friends Michael Hash and Jason Cloby were arrested in 2000 for the murder of an elderly woman that had occurred 4 years earlier in Culpeper County, Virginia. 74-year-old church organist and retired mail carrier Thelma Scroggins had been shot 4 times in the head at her home in 1996. Hoping for a lighter sentence, a woman who was serving time for armed robbery in an unrelated case implicated Hash, Weekly, and Cloby in the crime. The trio were innocent, but the authorities were convinced otherwise. Prosecutors then offered the defendants lenient sentences in exchange for pleading guilty. Exasperated and desperate to get the case over with so he could reunite with his young daughter as soon as possible, Weekly gave a false confession and took the deal. He was sentenced to 6 years and 8 months behind bars as a result. Cloby chose to go to trial and was acquitted after proving he wasn't even in town on the day of Scroggins' murder. And unwilling to admit to something he didn't do no matter what the cost, Hash also rejected the offer. He was convicted at trial and received the maximum sentence of life without parole. Hash didn't do anything wrong by refusing to confess to a crime he didn't commit. In fact, many if not most people would argue that he did the exact right thing by maintaining his innocence. And if anything, the case demonstrates a gross failure of the justice system, rather than the unfortunate consequences of a defendant rejecting a plea offer. But there's no denying that Hash's decision backfired terribly. After being released for his much shorter sentence in 2006, Weekly was approached by attorneys from the University of Virginia Innocence Project. They were interested in fighting to exonerate Hash, but needed Weekly to admit that he falsely confessed to the murder. After mulling it over with his family, he agreed to provide a statement. Weekly signed an affidavit recanting his confession and the testimony against Hash that he'd given at trial. The Innocence Project lawyers took it to court along with other evidence pointing toward Hash's innocence, including the complete lack of DNA and other physical evidence tying him to the crime scene. Luckily, the court vacated Hash's conviction in 2012 and he was freed from prison. Weekly's conviction was finally erased from his record 10 years later in 2022. 7. Ivan Safronov. Russia is notorious for handing down shockingly harsh prison sentences to criminal defendants, especially in cases involving an alleged betrayal against the country. So, it might have been in 32-year-old journalist Ivan Safronov's best interests to accept the prosecution's offer for a 12-year sentence in exchange for his confession to treason. Safronov was a highly respected correspondent for the leading independent news agencies Kommersant and Vedomosti. He eventually left journalism, though, to work as an advisor to the head of Russia's space agency Roscosmos. Then, in 2020, he was arrested for allegedly sharing military secrets with Czech spies. Roscosmos officials insisted that Safronov didn't have access to state secrets during his time working for the agency. But the truth seems to be an arbitrary thing when it comes to Russia's justice system, and this inconvenient detail was overlooked. According to the BBC's Russian service, the charges are believed to stem from an article Safronov wrote about the country's sales of Su-35 fighter jets to Egypt, which in the BBC's words, triggered a diplomatic outcry. In other words, several countries weren't happy about it. Unfortunately, we may never know exactly why Safronov was accused of treason, given the notoriously secretive nature of Russian leadership. The country is also known for its lack of a perceived obligation to explain why they convict people and throw them in prison. But Safronov felt that the 12-year deal offered by prosecutors was unfair, so he chose to take a gamble and go to trial. Not surprisingly, he was convicted of the treason charge and was sentenced to 22 years behind bars in early 2023. The ruling sparked widespread outrage among his supporters, who've long believed that the allegations against him were exaggerated and were possibly even baseless to begin with. Many journalists have accused the authorities of punishing Safronov for his news reporting. Simply put, they believe that something he wrote embarrassed Putin and his cronies, and that this is the price he's paying for it. Even the European Union has acknowledged Russia's history of systematic repression against independent journalists, but sadly, it's nothing new. Safronov's lawyers said they plan to appeal the case, but we don't know much more than that at the moment. 6. Kevin O'Brien Allen. By the time he got arrested for selling $20 of weed to his friend in Bossier Parish, Louisiana, Kevin O'Brien had a handful of drug convictions under his belt. His priors included marijuana possession with intent to distribute in 2004, marijuana possession in 2007 and 2011, and methamphetamine possession in 2013. Despite his past decisions, he held a steady job, took care of his family, and had no history of violence. Allen was unaware that his friend Justin Shealy was working as a confidential informant for law enforcement when he sold him two $10 bags of marijuana. Although he was essentially caught red-handed and had a prior record, Allen was shocked when prosecutors offered him a 5-year prison sentence in exchange for pleading guilty to 2 counts of marijuana distribution. It seemed excessive, so he turned it down and the case went to trial in 2014. But unfortunately for Allen, the jury convicted him on both counts. When it came to sentencing, it didn't matter that Allen's prior convictions were non-violent. Under Louisiana law, he was considered a habitual offender, and it gave prosecutors considerable power to push for as heavy of a sentence as they saw fit, including life behind bars. The judge overseeing the case imposed 2 10-year terms, which were to run concurrently with one another. But this was simply meant as a placeholder until Allen's habitual offender hearing, which would decide his actual punishment. Before the hearing, prosecutors made another plea offer for a 20-year sentence, which Allen rejected. He was then convicted and sentenced to life with no parole, and has languished behind bars ever since. Allen doesn't deny selling weed, but he thinks the sentence is unfair, and a growing number of people agree with him. His case has been featured in the New Orleans Advocate and other media outlets as a troubling example of Louisiana's habitual offender law being applied unfairly and excessively. Even lawmakers have joined in the fight to change the policy, by introducing an amendment that would give current district attorneys the power to reduce sentences like Allen's. And in some cases, this would even secure their release through post-conviction plea agreements. The law passed, but Allen's fight for freedom continues. 5. Raymond Lindsey Jr. In Texas, in early 2015, police accused 46-year-old Raymond Lindsey Jr. of slamming his apartment door in an officer's face and threatening to kill several others while they responded to a call about an argument between him and his girlfriend. He also allegedly broke several items inside the apartment, including a TV, a glass coffee table, an entertainment center, and a cage with a live bird inside. Lindsey was charged with assault on a public servant and retaliation, and spent the next 19 months in jail while awaiting the outcome of his case. His court-appointed lawyer, Willis Everett Smith, told the Houston Chronicle that he didn't think Lindsey's anger was necessarily directed at the police, but that his client was more unstable than anything else. At one point, prosecutors offered a deal that would credit Lindsey with time served and enable him to walk free in exchange for pleading guilty to a reduced assault charge. But he turned the offer down because he reportedly believed that everyone involved in the case had conspired against him. Smith said he warned Lindsey that turning down the deal meant that the court would hold his lengthy criminal record against him and that he'd likely face a sentence of 25 years to life. The attorney also said that in his 30 years of practicing law, he'd never had another client turn down such an advantageous plea offer. Apparently unmoved by the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, Lindsey simply replied, "It is what it is." The decision to reject the deal was evidently shocking enough for Smith to request a psychiatric evaluation of his client. Lindsey was found competent to stand trial though, and the case moved forward. In the end, he was convicted of both charges and received a 40-year prison sentence. According to Smith, Lindsey didn't get mad about the sentence. Instead, he told his lawyer, "It's all good, you did your best." Lindsey challenged the court's decision to enhance his punishment as a habitual felony offender, but the ruling was upheld. 4. Sandra Avery. As a young adult, Sandra Avery struggled with a crack cocaine addiction. After being convicted 3 times of possessing $100 worth of the drug for personal use in the state of Florida, she cleaned up her life and joined the army. During her time in the military, Avery earned her accounting degree. She was later honorably discharged from the army and ended up landing a good job. Trouble found Avery again though a decade later, after she married a drug dealer and fell back into her addictive habit. At 47 years old, she ended up back in a courtroom, this time facing federal drug charges. Prosecutors gave Avery 2 choices: take a plea deal and agree to a reduced charge in exchange for a 10-year mandatory minimum prison sentence, or go to trial. She would later claim that nobody told her that her prior convictions made her eligible for a sentence enhancement, and that she'd face the maximum punishment of life if convicted. Believing that a decade-long sentence was excessive, Avery chose to go to trial. She was found guilty in 2005 and was consequently sentenced to life without parole. With the way the federal system's set up, judges don't always have much say, if any, in an offender's sentence, and prosecutors often have considerable power in determining the punishment. In Avery's case, it wasn't up to the judge. Advocates were shocked by what seemed like an overly stiff sentence for non-violent crimes, especially considering the years Avery spent serving the country and staying out of trouble before she relapsed. She even thought that the 10-year minimum that she was offered in the plea deal she turned down seemed harsh as well. Avery spent the next 9 years in prison, thinking she'd most likely remain there until her dying day. Her luck changed dramatically, however, at the end of 2015, when President Obama commuted her sentence, along with the sentences of 94 other prisoners who were serving seemingly unjust punishments. During an interview with the nonprofit Families Against Mandatory Minimums in 2021, Avery said she was more shocked to learn she was being freed than she was when she received her life sentence. Since her release, she's remained sober. She enjoys her job as a tour guide in Savannah, Georgia, and continues to look forward to the future. 3. Fantasia TORAN. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 came with some heated debates about social distancing, mask wearing, and other measures that were put in place by the CDC. And in many cases, people were legally required to follow these guidelines in order to prevent the virus from spreading. One such argument that occurred at the Syracuse Community Health Center in upstate New York got tragically out of hand, leading to the fatal stabbing of 44-year-old mother of 12 Chanel Price Green. And in the end, authorities charged 47-year-old Julius Brown and 26-year-old Fantasia Toran with the murder. According to the prosecutors, Toran and Price Green went to the health center separately for medical care. While waiting to be seen, Price Green allegedly got too close to Toran, who was pregnant at the time. Toran supposedly made some comments, and a heated disagreement ensued between the two women. At some point, Toran went outside and called Brown, who came to the center to back her up. The couple waited until Price Green exited the building, then stabbed her to death. Authorities accused Brown of inflicting the fatal stab wound to Price Green's heart, and they accused Toran of helping him. Brown was convicted of manslaughter and was subsequently sentenced to 25 years in prison. Prosecutors offered Toran a deal that would come with a 5-year prison sentence in exchange for pleading guilty to attempted manslaughter, but she turned it down. As a result, she was convicted of orchestrating the deadly attack and received a 25-year prison sentence. 2. Lakeith Smith. One day in 2015, 5 young men decided to rob some houses in Millbrook, Alabama. And after hitting their first property, they entered a second residence. The occupants weren't home, but someone saw what was going on and alerted the police, who arrived to discover the burglary in progress. Someone allegedly shot at the responding officers from inside the home. The cops returned fire, fatally striking one of the suspects, Adonte Washington. A grand jury cleared the officer of any wrongdoing after reviewing body cam footage, which reportedly showed Washington rushing toward the cop with a gun in his hand. Authorities blamed one of the other burglars, Lakeith Smith, for Washington's death. They knew he didn't pull the trigger, but under Alabama's accomplice laws, a co-conspirator can be held responsible for someone's death simply for participating in the acts that led up to the fatality. Smith was charged with felony murder and various other crimes in connection with the case. In an effort to avoid going to trial, prosecutors offered him a plea deal that would come with a 25-year prison sentence. But after weighing his options, Smith rejected it. Before the first witnesses were called to the stand, the judge overseeing the case offered Smith one last chance to take the deal, but he turned it down a second time and the case proceeded. The jury convicted Smith of felony murder, burglary, and 2 counts of theft. And as a result, he was sentenced to 30 years for the murder conviction, 15 years for the burglary charge, and 10 years each for the theft counts. The judge ordered him to serve the sentences back-to-back, amounting to 65 years behind bars, with an earliest possible parole date after 20 to 25 years. The 25-year sentence offered by prosecutors would have put Smith away for a long time, but he was hit with more than double the time he would have been looking at if he took the deal. Smith refused to show any sign of being upset, however, and instead grinned in the courtroom after being handed the stiff sentence. Chief Assistant District Attorney C.J. Robinson told USA Today that the prosecution was pleased with the sentence and that he didn't think Smith would smile for long after arriving at prison. But many people felt sympathetic towards Smith because he was young, and they also believed a murder conviction was unfair since Smith didn't fire the shot that killed Washington. Even Washington's own father said that he didn't blame the young man for his son's death. Afterward, Smith's lawyer won a resentencing hearing, and in 2023, the same judge who imposed the 65-year sentence ordered his terms to run concurrently instead of consecutively, effectively reducing his sentence to 30 years. He also received credit for the 8 years he'd already served. Under state law, Smith is required to serve either 15 years or 85% of his sentence behind bars, whichever comes first. This means that Smith could see freedom after 7 more years in prison, at which point he'll be around 30 years old. But his defense team is unsatisfied with the new sentence and plans to appeal the decision and possibly fight for a new trial. 1. Robert Rose. When 19-year-old Robert Rose arrived at his home in Queens, New York one day in 1992 and saw his mother's boyfriend standing outside with a gun, he tried to avoid a confrontation. But the man approached him and a struggle ensued as Rose wrestled for control of the firearm. He saw his mother's boyfriend reaching for something and thought it might be another gun, so he pulled the trigger on the weapon they were fighting over and shot his opponent multiple times. The man died, and Rose turned himself into authorities the next day, and he was subsequently indicted for murder. Prosecutors offered Rose a 3 to 9 year prison sentence in exchange for a guilty plea. Because he had no criminal history and knew that he acted in self-defense, Rose took his chances on a trial, believing, perhaps naively so, that the jury would take his side. As you've likely guessed by now, the exact opposite happened. The judge found Rose guilty, and he received a 25-year prison sentence as a result. He served 24.5 years and was released shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic. By then, he was in his mid-40s and had lost a large chunk of his life to the prison system. Rose's case highlights an ongoing trend in New York State, where defendants who turn down plea offers and choose to go to trial face severely harsh consequences compared to the terms laid out in the deal. Dubbed the trial penalty, it's the reason many criminally accused individuals plead out, even in cases where they don't truly feel they're guilty or despite their belief that the sentence offered in a plea is unfair. In most cases, though, it's much lighter than the punishment that could come with a trial conviction, and many defendants err on the side of better safe than sorry. As Rose unfortunately learned, those who dare to challenge their case are often served with disproportionately heavy outcomes. If you were falsely accused of a crime and had the choice to either take a plea deal and serve 6 months in prison or take it to trial and face up to 5 years, which would you choose? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.